Okay, and we're live. Just to do a quick test, I want to see to make sure it is working the way I expect it to. I am just going to quickly head over to Odysee because I am rebooting this with a completely, somewhat different format. What I'm doing now is I've moved things, I've moved the ability to stream to Odysee to see if, because being that it's a decentralized platform, it should be capable of holding onto the live stream, and now I'm checking that. Let me see here. It does look like there is a live stream in progress, so I've got that working. So consider this a reboot. Basically, I put this up on Odysee. It will be on YouTube at least for the foreseeable future while I'm working with StreamYard. And greetings to everyone listening. This is Deacon Joseph Swaden, and we're going to be, let's just call this version 2.0. You can go to the Orthodox Apologetics channel on Odysee. That's where we're filming from, as well as from YouTube. For those curious, good evening, everyone. And the Odysee channel, just if you were curious about that, is here. And so we're going to be, this is going to be a new thing, what we're going to be doing, because I'm going to take it a little bit deeper than I usually do. The whole goal, I think, we've done this show now for going on just about going on 3 years, I think. And so, in any case, it's been a while. And one of the things that's a lot different now is that there's a lot of Orthodox apologetics shows out there. There's a lot of great resources. So I want to delve more when we do these sorts of shows into the nature of who are like people who are opposed to orthodoxy, people who bring challenges up to orthodoxy. And so that's the way I'm looking at the show from now on. Oh, also, there's a dog. So if you hear barking, I have a dog. So that's new. But hello to everyone who's listening. The title of the show is kind of self-explanatory. A little bit depressing, but it's about reason and theology, the decline of reason and theology, and discussing some of the underlying positions held by its host Michael Lofton and why there are, I guess you could say, what is basically the issues with, I guess, his historical views and presuppositions that should be answered. So with that, um, I'm going to just quickly pull up the YouTube channel because I'm still resetting up things the way I used to. Still kind of new at it. So that's something that if you could give me some patience here. I am just getting to it now, so just figuring out the stuff as we speak. Some of it is different because of the fact that, as I said, our main broadcast is going to be on Odysee. Um, Cult of Modernism says, amazing how much that show has changed in such a short period of time. There's a reason for that. I'm hoping that I'm hoping, I don't know if he's going to make it, but I'm hoping Craig Trillia comes on the stream in a little bit because of the fact that he was personally there to watch the beginning of the end, as it were. And so that's something that it's we're definitely going to talk about. So I wanted to get a little more in depth how this started. Why I started doing this show again. I had been planning to do the show again as soon as I figured out a bulletproof way to do it. And so this is as bulletproof as you're going to get. It costs money, unfortunately, but that's I guess that's part of it. Because if you want to avoid being controlled by big tech, you have to have the ability to stream and to appear separately. So that's part of the reason why, if you look at that, it's actually primarily streaming to Odysee as well as to the YouTube channel. So this is something that I'm very big on, decentralizing your kind of communications. It's extremely important. But yeah. So with that said, I'm going to just go to my channel here, and I'll just put the title of this episode really quick, just because I can. And so, give me just a moment while I do that, so that it's a much more responsible looking show, and that's things that I think we really do need to do. And so, let me just kill that, go back, and let's see here. Yeah, even the new StreamYard is kind of crazy. Once you upgrade, I can have up to 10 guests now, which sounds like fun. I can put everyone who's watching on this show. uh, and so that's we'll just got that and gonna put that up so we know what we're talking about today. This all started, as I mentioned, I was planning on doing a show anyway, and I finally got everything together, and then I was like, well, what am I going to talk about? And I wasn't even sure, to be honest. And then somewhere I saw that I guess Michael Lofton wrote something about the errors of Jay Dyer, and that attracted my attention. So I was like, okay, so I'm going to watch that. And I know what I noticed was kind of offensive, and it didn't seem like Jay was wrong. But I was like, you know what, this is silly, because he brought up stuff that he had actually brought up on our program when he was on, Michael Lofton. And one of the things he brought up when we were talking about the consensus patrum, and he was trying to say that it wasn't working, he tried to argue that there were early church fathers that were subordinationists. And then later on in the discussion, he talks about early church fathers who were iconoclasts. And I was like, okay, you know what? Produce your subordinationist and iconoclast fathers. And he's like, I'll send it to you. Yeah, that was a year and 9 months ago. So I realized that YouTube, I guess, has this community function. So I made kind of a joke of that when I realized that when he was attacking Jay Dyer, he actually brought up iconoclasm and subordinationism. And I'm like, wow, I guess you're still using that line. And so I was like, okay, so I made a ha on my community thing, and then basically I forgot about it. Then the next day, I see he's attacking Jay Dyer again, and then again. And then the next day, I see he's attacking him again. And so at first, I'm thinking to myself, okay, maybe he's just trying to latch some followers off. That seemed to be kind of the intent. I saw in some of the comments of people like, yeah, you're helping. This is a little sleazy, but Jay Dyer put up a meme, and I'm like, I'm surprised, because usually he's very quick to respond. And then I saw a day later, I guess he was like, it looks like he's at a theme park or something. So I'm like, okay, maybe he's on vacation. And then I thought, wait a second. Is he doing this just because of the fact that a guy's on vacation? He's kind of taking advantage of it. And I thought that's really kind of sleazy. And I would hope that that wasn't the reason. But in any case, what we did learn is that I went looking for more stuff on what Michael wrote. And yes, you're right. Cult of modernism, pointed out, if the church fathers were constant and valid councils don't make errors, then you don't need the papacy. That's exactly right. And this is exactly why the consensus patrum is so scary to people, because of the fact that if you can do everything you need to with the fathers, you don't need a papacy. And when I argued with him, I purposely mentioned the papacy, and he just kind of backed off and was like, no, it could be an ecumenical council. But I knew he meant the papacy. And in a later video, I guess he made in January of this year, he flatly says, because you can't determine tradition, you must have a final arbiter. And I was like, oh, okay. So we called that ages in advance. But in any case, so the biggest problem with understanding Michael Lofton's historical understanding is that, frankly, he goes from a church undivided to a church undecided. It's really kind of sad. This is not going to be a particularly long episode. There's not much to say there, but it's important to note that if somebody is saying that the church needed help deciding, if subordinationism was an option, then that's basically saying Arius might have been right, and the church never took that view. And none of those fathers that were, none of the fathers that were at Nicaea took that view, that were Orthodox. So it's kind of a crazy position to hold. Um, but in any case, I'm still waiting for that list of subordination as fathers. I don't think I'm going to get it. As soon as I made that comment on the YouTube community, I was immediately blocked from Reason and Theology's YouTube community. So I have a feeling that this is becoming a sales pitch to scare Orthodox, but it actually has nothing behind it. And so that's part of the reason why I can say that, not only is Michael's understanding defective, but I think he knows it. He just doesn't want you to know he knows it. And so that's why I'm, kind of putting this here and hoping, again, we're going to, I expect, I'm hoping Craig will show up. If he doesn't, I'm going to go into my views on why the Reason and Theology began to decline. Ruffling Steak said they started blocking anyone Orthodox commenting on their videos. Yes, I noticed that. And okay, that's probably true. I mean, it is kind of scary, but that's kind of part and parcel for, I hate to say that, papal apologists. In the end, they're not really patristic apologists at all. It's almost impossible to be. They're proof texters, and when the proof texting stops working, then they move on to something else, and usually it's philosophy. But in any case, so as to why Reason and Theology started to decline, I remember the show about 2 years ago, which is actually where it kind of piqued my interest. They had um, Eric as the Roman Catholic guy, you had Craig as the Orthodox guy, and you had Michael as the kind of undecided guy who was a moderator. And I remember at that time, everyone I talked to about this show was convinced that Michael was kind of like in between Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, and I never got that impression. I was always under the impression that he was a convinced Roman Catholic. I didn't think it was an act until he was on my show, and until after I debated with William Albrecht. But that's when I started to suspect that this wasn't really a debate show proper, and I think that that's part of the reason why. I believe Eric was direct about his positions on things, and I believe that the purpose, he thought the purpose was, really to just argue. But then once, after the Fatima debate that I mentioned on the YouTube, the roundtable, basically things started to decline. Craig ended up leaving. They had Father Patrick kind of take his place, and now that Pints with Aquinas had that whole. They were going to do an Ubi Petrus Eric Ibarra debate. It ended up becoming Eric Ibarra versus Father Patrick, and Father Patrick still by vote ended up really winning. Okay, so as we continue, I see there's some comments. I'm going to try to address them. Let's see. It's the same skepticism Cardinal Manning asserted. It's impossible for anyone to figure out what's believed in the past. All you can do is believe what the church says right now. Terrifyingly, that's almost Protestant in its thinking. It's very contemporaneous. And so, in the 17th century, French Jesuits arguing with Calvinists. What were his main points of contention with Jay? Michael's main points of contention with Jay will always be the same, and they will always be so typical of a Roman Catholic argument. And that I'll boil it down to you very simply. You did not understand correctly. And what I mean by that is, this is, again, I've made references to this in the past about the Roman Catholic belief in invincible ignorance and how important that is. You cannot, in Roman Catholicism, systematically believe that a person can actually intellectually reject Catholicism. It is impossible. The teaching is basically, if you reject Roman Catholicism knowing what it is, it's because you're too stupid. So, with this in the back of your head, every Roman Catholic apologist who has done some studying, and Michael Lofton has done some studying, he will be listening for an error in whatever Jay said. In this particular case, they were arguing over some pithy thing, like it was like, whether universal ordinary magisterium and ordinary magisterium meant the same thing. And the truth is they do sometimes, and Jay was right on that. But the point is, Michael starts to kind of dive in and go, but you didn't really mean it this way. So clearly you are completely ignorant and don't understand Catholicism, which is ridiculous because, frankly, much as I have no feeling towards J. Dyer whatsoever, but I'm pretty sure he was a Roman Catholic longer than Michael Lofton was Orthodox, if Michael Lofton was ever Orthodox, because I get the impression he was just going and communing at a Greek church, but had never actually left the Roman Catholic Church. And so let me see. Well, Dyer made a ton of errors. I would not be surprised. I didn't watch his show to be fair. I watched only Lofton's show. I just can't. That was too much for me, just watching Michael Lofton. So Dyer managed to make Lofton look good. His argument against Dyer was Dyer confuses the ordinary magisterium with the ordinary universal magisterium. Of course, that distinction is fake and made at Vatican II. But still, well, it depends, because if you're using that sort of logic, then if J. Dyer, coming from a trad cath background, wouldn't be paying attention to Vatican II, the ordinary universal magisterium, which I even double checked this on Roman Catholic sites, is basically exercised by the Pope when he's making non-infallible statements. So it does exist. It's just that I don't think that Michael Lofton was presenting an honest case, if I'm going to be honest. But Atomic Lead, there's loads of good reasons to criticize Dyer, but Lofton manages not to use them. Well, that's because Michael Lofton is a convinced Roman Catholic, and he uses convinced Roman Catholic methodology. Really tragically today, I noticed that he's trying to doubt the Holy Fire. That was as of like an hour ago, so that was nice. But the point is, oh wait, hey, someone's shown up. Hold on.
Hello. Hey, Deacon Joseph.
Hey, Craig, how's it going?
It's good. I missed that whole first 10 minutes there, so I can't comment nor endorse those contents.
Well, mostly I was explaining my week and how this episode ended up getting created, and it was because of the fact that I guess Mike Lofton is just kind of like obsessively discussing J. Dyer and Orthodoxy now, like every day.
Well, I think you already hit the nail on the head, which is how you said how the sausage is made. You had a whole episode of that.
Yeah, exactly.
And I just think the issue is we're turning apologetics into MMA because it gets views, it gets clicks. One thing I appreciate about what you do in your channel, there's nothing commercial about this whatsoever. And so, people are just making the things of God into crass entertainment. And, I think, here's my opinion. I personally think...
I haven't watched any of I saw there were things like the Reason in Theology Comedy Hour. I'm like, what is that? Is it funny? I mean, do they mean comedy in the generic sense, like he doesn't die at the end?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but they had a whole comedy hour on me where there was a video of my oohs and ahs and bringing up stuff about my wife, and this is problematic, and I think this is where all of us go, okay, all right, we said a lot of stupid things, made a lot of mistakes. We got to click reset on this. We're Christians. For one, we got to be doing this for the love of God, not for money, not for fame or whatever.
Exactly.
So it's, even to be perfectly honest, a sort of wary of the title of this show, but it's because I respect you personally that I'm on board. Because what we don't want to be is invested in people's personalities. We want to be focusing on arguments, looking at helping others through apologetics so that, they could better understand the faith. It's not about getting acolytes and making people feel like they're part of a winning team or whatever. It's about growing closer to God.
Yeah, it's about the truth, and that's really what it comes down to, and everything else is secondary or tertiary or shouldn't even be mentioned. So yeah, I totally agree with you there. My biggest concern here, and this is why I put in the defective historical understanding part and why I actually put it out by name, is because I know that, people who search these things search up their own names. So I wanted to explain that in the show that I had, the show that he did on Jay, he mentions subordinationism, he mentions iconoclasm, and he tries to say there are fathers who defend them. So then I brought up the fact that he had said that to me 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And then he said he was going to send a list, which never happened because you're not going to find a list like that. But in any case, that's
I just think in general, when we say the saints are wrong and we accuse the saints of no, they're wrong and they had to come up with a better understanding. Of course, I know better than XYZ saint. That's why we need icons. Look at the icon, right? It has to do with God's divine energies. These guys are made wise by God's grace. Who are us schmucks, right?
Exactly.
To be accusing them. So we need to harmonize the saints. That's how the saints have always dealt with the saints.
Exactly.
So what can I tell you?
All right, and let me see. Cult of Modernism wrote, a wild Orthodox appears. Deacon, if Craig tells you to ban me, don't listen to him. Why would you ban him?
Well, no, it's your channel. You don't have to ban him.
Oh, okay.
No, he just he appears under different names, and I think that kind of causes trouble. I don't like that.
Oh, okay.
but it's your channel. You don't know who he is, so it doesn't matter.
Well, he hasn't said anything wrong to me, so I'm good. Let me see here, and it looks like Father James that would be Father John Whiteford, came on his show to go over the toll houses. Before doing this show, I actually tried to watch that at double speed. I don't know. I feel like it was one of those gotcha shows where I guess he was kind of hoping that it would be an embarrassing presentation, but both Father John and Father Patrick are pretty well-trained speakers, and it went just fine.
I already had a very similar show with Father John specific on that topic. So there was it was just like retreading. It was like, oh, well, that was a good episode on Craig's channel, so I'm just going to, do it myself. And I think it's positive because it brings a defensible view of the Orthodox teaching to a wider audience. And, in the end of the day, reason theology is about making money. I think it's reason theology LLC.
He had a reason. He had a real estate advertisement on his last show.
Well, maybe he reads them now. I don't know. I think sometimes he can't choose them. But he has an LLC. It's made to be a business. Businesses aren't by default bad, right? So it doesn't mean it's bad because of that.
Yeah.
But because it's a business, he'll bring on Orthodox guys. And, right, it's nothing to do with undercutting Orthodoxy when Father John Whiteford and Father Patrick are talking about aerial toll houses. He just lets them talk. Because here's the thing, all Roman Catholics care about is the papacy's real. They could be wrong about everything else. Yeah. Everyone else could be defensible, more patristic, better in every single way, have better saints, all that stuff. Just let me have my papacy. So that's why they don't really feel intimidated by Orthodox speaking on any other issue as long as it's not ecclesiology.
Well, and that's a huge problem because that kind of colors what they're thinking in terms of the fathers themselves as well, because they tend to see even the fathers as correctable. So, as long as you have the papacy, well, we can, just rewrite St. Cyril or something. And the point is, it's a terrible attitude to have, but I've seen it so often. And so, yeah, it's really kind of a sad thing. But you brought up something, and I literally slipped my mind as we were talking about it. But I did want to talk. We were talking. I didn't go into detail about the decline of reason in theology, but you've already brought up some of it, which is that in some ways, it's become a corporate entity. I have no idea why one would hire actors for. I don't understand any of it.
They hire actors? I'm not aware of that.
Oh yeah, they. I don't know if it's the guy from The Office. Did you see that thing?
Maybe he's just a fan. Maybe he did it because he's a fan. I don't know.
I don't know. I hope that's the case. But in any case, it's let me see here. Can you guys go? Offling States asks, can you guys go over the Trent Horn rebuttal to Jay's top 10 reasons? I haven't actually heard Trent Horn's rebuttal. I mean, I could probably do that. We could both do that in a future episode, or we could do our own episodes because we both have our own channels. That's up to That's up to.
I'd probably do it with you. Let me tell you, my schedule is so packed with just original research and stuff on just weird topics that I like Orthodoxy in India and stuff like that.
Yeah, I gotta admit, I read one of your recent blog articles, and I saw the word aphartodocetism, and I was like, I don't know what that means. And I Googled it and literally found nothing except your article. So I don't, I'll ask about it later.
Sure.
And then, it's just it's kind of silly, and I've been watching a lot more stuff lately, especially apologetics concerning Islam, and I mean, there's so much to do, and I think we've got to, I think it's time to, start hitting topics harder, and so then, let's see here. Okay, so I think that bite-sized video is making J a low-hanging fruit in the world of RC apologetics. I don't know, I guess. And much of this comes down to the notion of the atonement. What do you hold? I don't know that much of it comes down to the notion of the atonement. I think everyone believes in an atonement.
I think he's saying that sometimes there's these ramifications to a certain doctrine that then infects everything else, right?
Yeah,
so I don't know if that's what he's implying.
It's possible, but we have the Council of Orange, so I don't see a point to that argument, because you could make an Orthodox argument. I think you actually did that on one of your blogs. You did a discussion of, was it yours, or was it there was another apologist, it might have been, who did a discussion of the atonement, from an Orthodox perspective. I don't think that that's necessarily problematic. What it really does come down to, I hate to say it, is ecclesiology. It is the papacy, and it is the nature of tradition, how we see it. And it's, if we cannot respect the fathers of the church, and we have to say, well, they're open to revision, then you have nothing left. It's basically except the papacy. So I think that's part of the mentality. Most of Trent's arguments were bad, like denying that Honorius was anathematized for heresy.
Yeah, that's a weird one.
Yeah,
the council flat out teaches he taught heresy. Now I've read. See, most people haven't read what Honorius actually said, and if you read it, it's not that bad, in all honesty, and that's why Saint Maximus defended him. But here's the thing: we don't go by my understanding. We have we have an ecumenical councils, both Nicaea II and Constantinople III, that weighed in on this.
Yeah, and one thing that Bishop Enoch has brought up when he's been on our show in the past, because he looked at old texts, the papal oath that was taken all the way up to the 11th century, every pope had to anathematize Honorius as a heretic. Like, I don't see how that could even be.
Well, and that's why, there's like, well, what is a heretic? Is it formal heresy? Is it material heresy? Is it this heresy, that heresy? And it's like,
They weren't that specific in the oath. They just said he was a heretic.
Well, that's the thing. Like, well, what is an adulterer, right? It's like whenever you speak like that, it goes back to what Satan said in the garden. Did God really say? Like, it's just things don't mean what they plainly say.
Yeah.
And the fathers just didn't use those categories of thought to try to say, well, they didn't mean this because we invented this later category of thought which would somehow lessen the ramifications of this episode. Thereby, that means these fathers didn't think this. That's just ridiculous. But again, it has to do with, as long as the Pope is right, that's all that matters. You can invent any way of thinking as long as the Pope is right.
And it's kind of crazy because, this is one thing that shocked me in this process of, kind of researching for this episode. I saw a blog post written by Michael about a month ago, like the end of May. And it was referring to Steve Skojec from 1 Peter 5, who basically describes an extremely traumatic experience in his entire life as a Roman Catholic. Like, this guy's been manipulated, he's been used, he's watched abuse cases. So I was like, wow. Like, I converted from Roman Catholicism, and I must have had a really happy childhood. None of these things happened to me. But, like, this dude is like really miserable. I mentioned this in a blog post about papist doomerism, because then I saw that Michael had written something to the effect of where he wasn't even sure whether his priest's ministrations were valid. I'm like, how is that okay? Like, there's no breaking point. If Rome is that important that you don't even know if you're really receiving the Eucharist and it doesn't matter, Like, that makes no sense to me. Like, that would be a big concern. It would be a real practical concern, and I'm just like amazed because to me it seems like what I saw in the comment sections, especially on this Steve Skoviak's page, was people just basically going, well, it's either Catholicism or atheism. And I'm like, has it ever occurred to you that maybe this papal kind of structure you thought is really there might not be? Like, are you just going to abandon Jesus Christ because the papacy's that bad? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, no, this is a serious issue people don't talk about. There's Roman Catholics who I greatly respect. They're really nice, good people, and I'll just say, if the papacy wasn't true, they told me I wouldn't be a Christian anymore. I just couldn't believe in it. And it's because the epistemology of papism is how they understand the Christian religion to even be true. And what concerns me about that is, the long story short,
it's
we ought to be Christians because we love God, right? Like, if I find out something about my wife's past where it's like, oh, this whole pretense of relationship wasn't what I thought it was. So all that love for years meant nothing, like, I'm not going to try to come to grips with this in some other way.
Well, that's the amazing part, because look at the gospel. If we look at the power and strength in our Lord's speech throughout it, but basically your entire belief in him hinges on an interpretation of one line of Matthew. That's terrifying. Like, all the other stuff, that he commanded us to do, but that promise to Peter, I just think you're a liar now. Like, how can a person hold that mentality? Oh, I have a dog now, just so you know, Craig.
Oh, I didn't know you didn't have a dog. There you go.
I know, new dog, very new. She's only like 4 months old.
Oh, brand new puppy smell.
Yeah. So let me see here, and so I'm seeing a lot of comments, but I'm seeing a lot of comments moving here. I guess, that was a reason in Theology post on YouTube, amateur Orthodox apologist. I think that's silly. Whenever somebody says amateur Orthodox apologist, in the first place, a professional Orthodox apologist technically would probably, I guess the only ones I could think of would probably be like J. Dyer and Ubi, because they actually do make money. But apologists in general are amateur because they're not professional.
Well, I could actually give a somewhat detailed response to that question if you want to hear it.
Oh, sure. No, I'd be glad to.
So I don't have notes in front of me, people, and there's no like PowerPoint presentation, so you're just gonna have to pay attention, take notes yourself, and whatnot. So anyway, this issue with Nicaea too, there's a pretty oft-repeated papal meme that the letter of Pope Adrian to the emperors, it's the first letter read in Act 2 of Nicaea 2. There's all these like high and mighty papal claims, okay? And then there's a letter afterwards. This is a letter that's paid attention to last, but there's a letter to Pope Tarisius. And there's actually some funny comments within the actual minutes of the council where Pope Tarisius says, like, is this the real letter? And they go, yeah, it is. And then they read it. And then in the Latin version of that letter, it pretty much says that Tarisius was elevated improperly because he was a layman, and then it makes complaints about jurisdiction in the Balkans. Now, not surprisingly, if you read the Greek minutes of this council, in the first letter we talked about, which is the letter to the emperors, all the papal claims aren't there. And in the letter to Tarisius, all the insults against him and the claims of jurisdiction aren't there. There's just one faint reference to his elevation being improper, which has made it into the minutes, and a quotation of Matthew 16:18 saying that, the Pope has primacy. That's also in the Greek minutes, but that's in the latter letter. And so my assertion was, as an amateur apologist, I will own that because I am an amateur. I barely am an apologist. I'm just some guy that likes doing this. Right?
Frankly, I think you're pretty good, Craig. So I'm good.
All right. Well, I don't know. Is it an amateur someone who's like a beginner, right?
Well,
so how long have you been doing this?
Yeah, I don't think you're. I mean, in terms of an amateur is somebody who doesn't do something professionally, if we're going by the technical term.
Well, and I definitely don't do it professionally. So
yeah, but
so I got. It's like saying, "Oh yeah, you could call me fat, but it sounds bad out of your mouth, right?" If I am an amateur, then I don't see it as an insult. So anyhow, that aside, the issue is that whether or not the textual critics of Nicaea II, and there's pretty much only two scholars that have seriously looked into this, and Father Richard Price has endorsed the latter. And I think they're both Germans, Wallach and Lambers. All right. And Father Richard Price, because Lambers wrote put together the critical edition of Nicaea II, the recent translation, I think in 2016 or whatever.
Yeah.
So being that he put it the critical edition in Nicaea II, obviously the most recent theory is going to be the one that's going to get most attention. And his theory is this, that the Latin minutes are the original. And not the Greek.
That's kind of odd.
Which is odd, it kind of flies the face of common sense, but here's his reasons, and people need to understand his reasons. Because in the 860s, Anastasius the Librarian made several accusations that the Greeks were forging the minutes of Nicaea II. Now, he actually made mention of which letter he thought was being falsified. The letter he said was being falsified wasn't the first letter to the emperors with all the high and mighty papal claims. It was the second letter to Tiresias about the elevation of Tiresias to the patriarchy.
So it's not even relevant.
Well, it was relevant during that time. Well,
no, but it's relevant to the argument, to the current argument, because it's talking about the wrong letter.
Well, true, but they tried linking it, and here's how. So obviously, Photius was a layman who was very quickly elevated to the patriarchy. And so in these battle of letters between Emperor Michael III and Pope Nicholas, and these were all ghost-written by Anastasius the Librarian.
Right.
Anastasius saying, if you look really hard at into the minutes, you will find this. It's actually kind of a peculiar comment. Like, what do you mean? Like, just, dig deeper in the file folder for Nicaea II and you'll find this Latin letter. It's pretty obvious that the Greek side didn't know what he was talking about, and he was pushing this because Anastasius himself widely used forgeries, like the Pseudo-Isidorian decretals.
Exactly.
So now people don't really appreciate this, but Nicaea II occurred about 90 years before Anastasius was doing this. Theoretically speaking, they still should have had the original Latin translation. They could have, though there's no indication of this, because Anastasius ended up bringing a new copy of the Greek back with him after the Council of Constantinople IV in 869-870, the wrong Constantinople IV, by the way. So if they still had the original Greek from 787, it would stand the reason that he would have not needed to go get another copy of the Greek in Constantinople. We're going to talk about in a second why he went and got another copy of Greek, because this is ignored by the textual critics. So that being said, he speaks to the Greeks saying, you're forging the minutes, and if you only look closer, you'll find them. Like they have this Latin letter somewhere, and the Greeks just don't know what he's talking about, pretty much. So like, what are you talking about? So eventually, the Council of Constantinople IV occurs, 869-870. Photius is deposed, sent into exile, and Anastasius returns from Constantinople after, it sounds like a pretty made-up, harrowing tale of escaping Dalmatian pirates, and it's pretty peculiar. Like, he claims there's minutes to Constantinople IV, but the pirates destroyed them all, but I kept some hidden. And, this is the sort of weird stuff surrounding this guy. By the way, just so people know, Anastasius was excommunicated twice, once for murder. So, this is not exactly someone with a ton of credibility, but the point is he returned from Constantinople IV. He called Photius pretty much a forger in chief, like in Latin. And he also said that the Greeks altered the letter of Tiresias. All right. And so the scholars are saying, well, if all these people are saying the Greeks altered the letters, and they must have done it,
And then it goes even for the extrapolation, which is something Michael brought up. Is again, and I've heard this before. This this charge of forgery on the part of Saint Photius. It's mind blowing.
Well, it gets deeper. It gets deeper. So, right, Anastasius is making the claim, but here's what Anastasius never says. You'll not find Anastasius say this, which is Photius forged those letters in Nicaea too. He called Photius a forger. He said that the Greeks forged the minutes, but he never said Photius forged those minutes. Why is this relevant? I'm going to tell you why right now. In the preface to Nicaea 2, in the New Latin translation that Anastasius wrote, in the preface, he says, the Latin translation that we have is highly deficient, so I purposely got the Greek because it's more accurate, and we could glean that he used the quote and quotation marks original Latin in the parts where he felt the Greeks messed stuff up. Now, here's the weird part. In the preface to, and I think it's Manzi 12, page 1074, if you really want to see it yourself, that in the preface there, he then says that Tiresias had the minutes changed at the council itself because it would have prevented the council from being accepted from the church worldwide if his patriarchate was called into question. So the person who the textual critical scholars are using to infer, keywords infer, he never explicitly says that Photius altered the Greek minutes in Nicaea 2. The person who they're relying upon is explicitly saying that, no, they were altered at the council itself. And we also actually have another 10th century Latin source specific on this issue that says the same thing. So this shows the official position in the West was the Greek minutes were fundamentally accurate because they made that change during the council itself. That's why Tiresias said, is this the right letter? Because he wanted to make sure it was the translated version with all the embarrassing stuff taken out. So people don't like thinking this, but these councils were highly diplomatic affairs. There was wheeling and dealing. We see this in session 4 of Chalcedon, for example, where they don't like the creed that's made at Chalcedon, so they bring 17 or 19 guys all together and they write the creed of Chalcedon right then and there while everyone's waiting. These were very highly politically charged affairs.
They were, for all intents and purposes, global affairs.
Exactly. So you have the legates of Rome during Nicaea 2. They want concessions in the Balkans. They show up. So if you want concessions, you always go, you always aim high. You don't go, if you're selling your house, you always say, I want $300,000. You don't say you're going to accept $250,000, right? You always give the high number. So they go there with the high number, and essentially it gets whittled away in the council itself. What they read is actually what was accepted, because they weren't going to give the Balkans, and they didn't give the Balkans. They weren't going to accept those criticisms of Tiresias. They weren't going to accept those extravagant papal claims. So I don't doubt that a lot of these things potentially, especially the latter, the Balkan claims and stuff, were actually done, but they were not accepted in the council itself. Now, here's one last thing that people ignore. If you read side by side, I think it's letter 865 of Pope Nicholas, which is written by Anastasius, and you read that with the letter to the emperors of Nicaea 2, the Latin version, that is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you read them side by side, they almost read exactly the same. And so if there's anyone who's a forger, it is the accused murderer who used forgeries that were written the same decade he was using the forgeries. Right, the pseudo-Isidorian decretals, right? Mr. Librarian that has access to the original manuscripts is taken in by a French forgery that's only a few years old, and then he's using it already. This is not a guy that's being overtly honest in his intellectual enterprises. All right?
Yeah.
And so the point is, why would he retranslate the Latin minutes from the Greek? Does anyone ever think about that? I'll tell you why. Because we know that the Franks had the minutes already in Latin. We know this from the Carolingian books.
Exactly.
They had them for decades. And what did the Franks not accept? Papal supremacy. Particularly, there was a synod in Troyes, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but a city in France called Troyes, where they asserted that all the bishops and priests have the power binding Lucene and the power of the keys.
That's actually also in the Episcopal oath taken in France, England, and I think 3 other Western countries.
It's all over the fathers.
Yeah.
But this happened 2 years in Troy, 2 years before Anastasius' retranslation of the Latin. So why would he do this? The answer is very simple. Because they already had the minutes in Nicaea too. And so you couldn't appeal to these minutes to say, we want you to accept these papal claims in France, when no, we have these minutes. We don't need to, it doesn't say that there. Well, what if the smart guy in Italy says, oh, we have the original, but it's full of defects. But we just got the better original Greek, kind of like what Luther did with oh, we got the Greek. We don't need the Vulgate, so we can retranslate.
Right, yeah.
Right? So kind of like that. We got the original Greek, so my new translation's better. And so just by the way, it now has it pretty much crypts from letter, it's in the year 865, letter 85 of Nicholas, this crypt stuff and adds it there, and it probably, or possibly anyway, didn't exist in Latin before then. So I actually felt I was being, in my own comments, very impartial by saying the Greek is probably true to the Greek and the Latin's probably true to the Latin, and the Greek, the Greek was
overwhelming.
Yeah, and the Greek was what was accepted. But if we start getting to textual critical theories, the sword actually swings back at the Roman Catholic side, because here they have a murderer who was caught with his pants down, not just accused of forgeries, caught with his pants down doing forgeries, suspiciously retranslating something that already exists in Latin just 2 years after there was a synod in France, which was seen as a rebuke of Rome. It's, you know what I mean? I'm not going to say I actually ascribe to this theory. It's just a theory that makes a lot more sense than the theory of Flambers, So I will publish on this, and I will lay this out in detail and have citations, and people can see it all out there. But if people want to go crazy and pretend that they're smart and whatnot, they want to get into the textual criticism, it doesn't help their argument. Common sense is that the Greek is fundamentally accurate. There's Byzantine scholars I spoke to that agree that the Latin is suspicious, the Greek is probably fundamentally accurate. And to say the Greek wasn't what was read by the Greeks, but the crass exaggerations in Latin was original, that requires a pretty high burden of proof, especially when our sole source of the Latin tradition is one man, Anastasius the Librarian, and he's not a source we could trust.
I think that's pretty solid settling of that issue. Definitely well done on that, and I hope you do write something big on that. Let me see. What are both your impressions of Father Peter here's talks on Russia's new martyrs? I'll be honest, I watched some of it. I was very impressed. A lot, this is stuff that, we've read a lot about, especially when you're among the TOC churches. I notice he mentions that in the next comment. We kind of know that stuff, so I thought it was great. Sure, it's going to be critical, but it's out there. I frankly thought, it's a worthwhile watch. I would recommend it. I don't know. Did you get a chance to see it?
Yeah, I think it's really good, and I think Father Peter's his 1 year in Jordanville seems to really rubbed off. It's God willing, I'll be there tomorrow. I plan to be in Jordanville.
That's cool.
But that being said, right, you can tell it's really rubbed off. And how do we understand how to deal with what we're dealing today? Well, we sort of dealt with it pretty recently, and I mean the church. And so what he's doing is extremely valuable, and we need to pray for Father Peter, because he's sort of when they write the history of this time, whether or not he will persevere in the faith and turn out to be a saint or not, none of us know the future, but he will be remembered because he's one of the few people speaking out about this. And quite frankly, a lone priest somewhere in Greece should not be the voice. But sometimes, like St. Maximus, he wasn't even a priest. Sometimes that's all you have is just one guy out there, speaking out on this. What he's saying is very important. I do think Father Peter has some political views that sometimes get separated from religious views, but that's when you could say you're just looking for things to criticize. It comes down to it. He's repeating what the saints say, And he's calling us to task that we have to take seriously being faithful in fundamentally anti-Christian times.
Yeah, and these are unfortunately anti-Christian times. It's part of the reason why I kind of set up the channel the way I did this time around, because frankly, you don't know if you're just going to be depersoned off of big tech. You really don't. Mr. Liver, Alive in Christ, said, "What language would the council be originally spoken in? If it was in the East, wouldn't the original minutes be in Greek as well?" Yes, that's exact. And I think that's exactly Craig's point, because it does not make sense that the Latin would be the original if it's being held in Constantinople.
Again, their whole argument is that the original Greek was originally Greek, but the Greek was heavily corrupted by Photius because some guy with zero credibility accused him. I think the term's gaslighting. That's not a term I use at home, so I don't know if it's right. But here's how I was taught by my father, for better or worse. Here's what my father told me. He said, whoever accuses you of cheating is cheating themselves. I guess that's kind of like Bronx logic. So the point is, right, when you accuse, you're a forger, you're the most awful guy ever. That's pretty good indication the guy making the accusation is actually guilty of it, especially when we have evidence that he does use forgeries. So it's just very peculiar that, scholars ignore basic fields like psychology, and they don't do anything cross-disciplinary and look at, if a guy's making these very repeated accusations and he quotes forgeries as he makes these accusations, maybe he's the guy introducing things. That would make more sense.
As much as I would probably, under any other circumstances, never quote the retired Bishop Lazar Puhalo, he once had a great quote regarding this, and it was, "Moral outrage is usually autobiographical." And let me see here. Cult of Modernism asks, can you discuss why Lofton pins the fourth and fifth councils against each other over the three chapters controversy? Who made that argument historically?
No.
Well, historically,
no.
nobody did. I think part of the reason why that's a bother, again, the three chapters controversy, again, speaks against this idea of some sort of papal monarchy, because that's a situation where you actually have high-ranking Western sees breaking communion with the Pope and staying in communion with the rest of the church. And actually then moving the Patriarchate to Ravenna, but that's afterwards. But the point is that, I think that would be part of the reason why, again, it's part of Michael's thing, which is to make history look incongruent. Because if you can say, as I said before you got here, it's going from the church undivided to the church undecided. And the whole point is, it's basically like, we don't know what the fathers could have said, so that you have a reason for an arbiter. That's my thinking. I don't know if you have any ideas on that.
Yeah, it's more of a modern thing, because like modern Oriental Orthodox, will say, we kind of agree with the fifth council, just not the fourth, and they contradict each other. That's why we agree with the fifth. But at the time, the Miaphysites were not, they weren't convinced by the fifth council either. Here is the controversy. The controversy is the fourth council supposedly accepted the letter of Ebus, for example, which has, heterodox statements in it, and the fifth council condemns it. Thereby, the fifth council reformed the fourth council. That is Michael Lofton's argument he's made publicly.
But in the fifth council, they specifically always say the letter supposedly attributed to Ebus. Everywhere they say that, because they cannot believe that letter was approved.
But let's just say he didn't really write it. They're going to argue fourth council still accepted the letter, no matter who wrote it. Here's the problem with that, even if Father Richard Price and scholars agree with it. Read the sessions 9 and 10 of Chalcedon. No one says that. No one says that. I had a whole video on this. I have a whole article on this. Long story short, if you read these sessions, they accept Ebus as, by the way, as the fifth council says, specifically because he anathematizes Nestorius, right? So the letter, the contents of the letter is not what they're accepting. Now, there was a letter they did accept, which was a letter which was a testimony in favor of Ebus orthodoxy, which defended him against the claim that he said, as much as Christ was God, so am I, or something like that. And so they said, no, he never said that. And there's a letter of the Odyssean bishops that testify to this fact. And so there's a few people that make mention of a letter, but that's the letter they're making mention of. And for example, Vigilius, I would think in an infallible letter, it's Second Constitutum, explicitly makes that case, right? So if I crypt that argument right from Vigilius, he goes in detail, painstakingly so, on how the letter of Ebus was not accepted and which letter was accepted, which was the letter of the Edessene clergy. So it's one of those kind of bottom shelf arguments that are made for people that don't actually read sources. But if you read if you actually read the sources, it's indefensible. I would debate anyone on it, not because I'm smart, not because I'm the most well-read. It's just because the facts are so on my side. There is a person. You have
the sources.
Unless I get hit really hard in the head or something beforehand, I just can't lose a debate because the sources are so clear. Not everything's like that in life. Sometimes sources are more vague. Like I could have a debate that Augustine has an orthodox filioque, that he rejects the pneumatology of Florence, but that would be a more of a close thing. This is not a close thing. This would be impossible to debate with all the facts laid out. And so it's a bad argument.
Now, Cult of Modernism asks, why does the Sixth Council say that Rome's record was spotless, even though Honorius was clearly condemned as a heretic? I'm going to presume they meant that Rome's record was spotless except for Honorius.
They could have meant that. It's, if you read St. Agatho's letter, he says that the Apostolic Church was spotless, right? Well, who is the Apostolic Church? That could be one, churches sometimes, like Jerusalem calls itself the Apostolic Church. So sometimes they could be a specific patriarchate, but also that could be a reference to the whole church. He also makes reference to the mother church within that letter. St. Augustine makes mention of the mother church, and it's of the whole Orthodox Catholic Church, not specifically of Rome. However, in the 9th century, they started using the term mother church, the Frankish theologians, to mean the Roman church specifically. In Orthodoxy, that's like, we don't speak of mother churches. Really, the ecumenical patriarchate made that up in the 20th century. We always spoke of sister churches. So when we speak of mother church, it always means the whole church. The idea that in the 7th century that the Greek East would accept that Rome is called the mother, is pretty much incomprehensible. But my opinion,
to be fair to the Franks, that would be their mother church, like just from a logistical standpoint.
Well, and they in fact did use that terminology a century later. So my opinion is that St. Agatho was speaking out of both sides of his mouth, and he knew that his letter could be taken both ways. And I think that's pretty consistent with what we see in councils. But you and I have sort of debated this topic, so we could disagree on that, but that's my analysis.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways to interpret it that, frankly, still add up to the fact that, no, this is not a proof of papal infallibility.
Here's what I think. Here's what I think we could agree upon, which is, was Agatho aggrandizing himself and his see for the betterment of his flock? Yes. Did the people take it the same way, with the same equal amount of aggrandizement, especially within the Sixth Council? They're saying that the Byzantine Empire would never fall into heresy and other laudatory things. Same thing, right? So it's, we read these things as modern and want to take them totally literally, but I'd recommend people, Ubi Petrus has a Florigelium, and he quotes the Sixth Council speaking of the Byzantine Empire not going to heresy. Well, how can you say that when you're holding a council pertaining to this, pertaining to heresy within the empire? So I think sometimes people take things in a retardedly wooden sense, and they don't read the source material consistently.
Yeah. Let me see. Harris asks, is this a true Orthodox channel? Without getting into a long debate over true Orthodoxy versus world Orthodoxy, this is my channel, and so the point is, I have Craig on. We're Orthodox people. I consider myself part of a true Orthodox jurisdiction. I believe Craig is with the Antiochians. The whole point is, the defense of orthodoxy is the defense of the truth. So I would say yes, but I think any Orthodox apologetics channel that is defending the truth is a true Orthodox channel, and that's just the way I see it. Let's see. If you're asking if it's part like sponsored by a specific jurisdiction or anything, no, it's not. And then let's see. Cult of Modernism. Lofton used to say he was a strong proponent of the Vincentian canon. How does this fit in with his magisterial weighting calculation / methodology? I'll be honest with you. I think he is not. He wasn't a strong proponent of the Vincentian canon when he talked to me, and I brought up the Vincentian canon, and it seemed like that was just totally incomplete for him, which is why I was pretty much certain that he was a convinced Roman Catholic. So no, I don't think that he likes quoting it, probably in the hope that other people won't read it, because if they did, they would know the methodology that you should use to determine the criteria of whether something is patristic, whether something is orthodox, and that is to use the fathers themselves.
I think, being that, the title is Decline of Reason Theology, I think that a lot of issues and misunderstandings could have been prevented if, and I won't say names, but if certain people disclose, I'm leaving the Orthodox Church, I'm actively re-entering communion with the Roman Catholic Church, instead of, I understand that people are, they got private lives. They don't have to tell anyone what they're doing. But when you publicly project, I'm still within the Orthodox Church, it's confusing the people that are Orthodox that you're overtly being Roman Catholic. So I remember when he went on your channel, he had that show, and you kind of took him to task to it on it. I was sort of naive. I'm like, he's within the Orthodox Church. He's just a little confused or something. And
I've been at this game a long time.
Yeah, and that is true. I know people that know you and what you've been doing for years. So yeah, it's I don't know. Maybe I just take things more at face value, and I'm a little more naive. But that being said, it's right. Like, you've got all the stuff going on in the background, but let's say someone says, "Oh, they're brainwashing you, those Roman Catholics." But then you get insulted as a fellow Roman Catholic. Well, how does that person know they're insulting you if they're presuming you're Orthodox, right? They're presuming that you wouldn't take that as an insult. So I think, I think was a time he was seriously pursuing orthodoxy. But ultimately, that magisterial weighting that cult of modernism is talking about, he likes to reduce everything to a system, and that system of consensus, that patristic consensus of St. Vincent, ultimately doesn't work because you can't be Roman Catholic if that's what you hold to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a much more cynical person in trying to read about, try to figure out his background this week in preparation for the show. I came across his conversion story on some site. What's it called? It's called the Coming Home Network. I guess when he first converted to Catholicism, he actually mentions orthodoxy and mentions exactly the same things he's talking about now. But one thing that I thought was odd, and this is something that I didn't realize it, when we finally stopped talking generally, and he, of course, like many other people, just degraded my clerical rank and started calling me Joseph because I was this or that. I was unbecoming of clergy. He did it again this week when I asked about the stuff. It's like very unbecoming of clergy. But then I noticed, like, on his Twitter account, he talks about this Roman Catholic priest, Father James Altman. And I guess he said something like he called his bishop a Nazi or something. And so, Michael's like, that was very unbecoming of clergy. And I was sitting here like, that's such a strange thing to say until I saw his bio. Now, he wanted to become a pastor of some sort. When he became Roman Catholic, he kind of said he had to throw that away. And I wonder if that kind of I hate to say that, but the folks that kind of come in with the baggage thinking they're going to be respected as father, I feel like maybe there might have been some considerations in that direction. I'm not trying to be harsh on him, but yeah, that, it does look, somebody said, okay, hold on. I'm getting comments left and right. Lofton's first response to Dia included this vague reference to a canon called Si Papa. I've never heard of it, but apparently it allows a council to judge a pope for heresy. You guys ever heard of it? It's obviously from a Western council if it's called C Papa, but I've never heard of it. You'd have to ask Jay about that. Have you heard of it?
No, and honestly, I know like it's important to Mike and to like a lot of trads that like, oh, you know, we could get rid of some of these bad popes or whatever, but it's all, you know, it's word trickery. It's like saying we could get rid of a heretical pope, but the pope's never been a heretic. There's a certain point where you just don't want to interact with this. When you see a crazy man ranting on the street saying wacky things that make no sense, saying the sky is green, there's a point where you just tune out because it just makes no sense.
Yeah. Then somebody wrote, does Lofton have a personal vendetta against Orthodoxy? I didn't think so originally. I've heard whispers and rumors that there are many personal factors, and that is where I stop because I don't want to know. Someone, of course, he hates Orthodoxy. Just put a video out against the Holy Fire miracle. That was actually really disappointing. I saw that. I guess he did one of those, live chat things that he does now earlier today, and so I put myself through watching it. And at one point, somebody asked, "What do you think about the Holy Fire?" And he starts talking about how he thinks it's a sham, like basically, like implying it's a sham. But then he took that section and made another video of it, and I was like, "Wow." Like, why are you trying to goad people? Honestly, I think the fact is he's trying to ruin Jay's vacation. I'm going to be honest. They figured out he's on vacation. So
I thought they were having some sort of conference or something. So it just maybe gives him something to talk about. But
I think that it's really tacky. Like, really attack the Holy Fire?
This is clickbait stuff, ultimately. And it's about business and making money. It looks like Reason Theology is now a full-time thing. Yeah, and so you sort of need to make material and whatnot. I mean, I think the idea behind Reason Theology was great. Have like a Hannah Combs, Orthodox and Roman Catholic talking about issues, sometimes bring in other topics that are of a theology or philosophical nature.
Now it's just a Roman Catholic show trying to be hip.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's kind of peculiar. It's pretty much after Pachamama, there was this sort of realization that's where the money and the clicks are, at least short term, right? I mean, long term, you're going to get deplatformed for some sort of stupid flame war, and then you just pissed it all away, and so that's what's going to happen, But ironically, the kind of tempered professional, somewhat impartial. No one's perfectly impartial, but somewhat impartial. Let's talk about intellectual ideas and have fun with it. That's something that would have had long staying power, but I think there was disillusionment that it didn't lift off right away. I mean, I think that particularly Eric Yabar and I had a lot of really good shows all before they had 1,000 subscribers.
Yeah.
Right. And so then you have the Pachamama fraud guy, right? Because it was really from Marshall. It wasn't even like a real protest. It was just some sort of plant. And they have him on and like, boom, all this stuff. It's like, oh, let's just become full Roman Catholic. It was a business decision, it appears. And the business decision coincided with stuff and personal stuff now, evidently. And so we can't judge the latter. And the former is not necessarily bad business, but it kind of ruins reason and theology. It ruins what it was supposed to be.
Well, that's what happens. Everything, changes over time, I guess.
We all change. And that's why, we can go look at Mike, how dare he changed, or look at, reason theology, everything changes, It's, at the end of the day, we just got to be decent to one another and be faithful to God. And hopefully we're changing in the right direction, not the wrong one.
I've heard now this cult of modernism I've heard Lofton say that. I see a lot of comments, but if they're not really like the C Papa thing, I have no idea. Let me see. Hold on. I've heard Lofton say that when a council condemns a pope for heresy, it's not the actual council making the judgment, but rather Christ making it through the council. Thoughts? Well, I think anything that happens through an ecumenical council is Christ happening. So I'm going to just leave it at that.
Yeah, I want to comment on this. My spiritual father told me this. And he said that, he said that conciliarity is evidence of the Spirit at work, right? Because
Yeah.
the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, one will, but three persons. And so when there is consent of the laity, like Apostolic Canon 34, consent, there's not only consent of the laity, like we see in the 1848 letter of the patriarchs, but also we have consent of the suffering bishops in the Metropolitan Apostolic Canon 34. But even stuff like with manuscripts, where there's like the scriptures themselves have all sorts of variants, but they all fundamentally agree, right? There's not just like one, it's not the Quran. There's just like one tradition and they all look exactly the same.
Yeah.
We have many variant traditions that agree. And so the Spirit works through consensus. And so I think that's where the truth of the Orthodox Church is. And so, of course, Christ is speaking through the council, or Christ is speaking through our biblical canon, or, you know, or anything where we see Christ at work. This includes our marriages, harmonious home relations, children and parents, masters and slaves, or in the modern context, it'd be bosses and employees. What we're looking for is consensus in all these relationships. That's where the Spirit is present.
Yep. I agree. All right. Okay, I don't want to belabor the point because we've actually been on for like an hour and 10 minutes, and this wasn't actually supposed to be a very long show. But this one came out to about the right time. Yeah. So I'm not exactly sure what to argue with the conciliarism thing. Well, I don't think that it's a heresy. That's a Roman Catholic thing. And why don't you guys remake R&T, find some why would we do that? You know, I mean, we could find a knowledgeable Catholic, but our goal would be to make him Orthodox. So
you know, it's like, you know, my channel was originally named Craig Trulia because it was just like me doing random stuff, right? And I realized, wait, I need a name for this. I can't just call it Craig Trulia. And I already had a blog named Orthodox Christian Theology. So it's like kind of weird. Like there's Reason Theology, Orthodox. It sounds almost the same, but my blog name's actually older. Now, like I find myself I feel have already addressed all the salient Roman Catholic points, and I'm quite frankly bored of it, where my own content has become more Reason Theology like, but inadvertently, right? So I'm having like Ethiopian Orthodox guy on, Indian Orthodox guy on, you know,
Protestant guy on, you know,
you know, Protestant guy on. I'm having a scholar soon on the composite hypostasis on that issue on soon.
So you kind of rebuilt Reason and Theology.
But I'm not, I'm not trying to. I'm just doing what I feel like, right? So it's interesting.
It shows how important you were to the original show.
Well, yeah, you know, it is because I believed in the idea, because I found it interesting and entertaining. And so sort of now that like all that Roman Catholic baggage and dealing with them is kind of out of the way, I'm just sort of going into that. But Mike is a very good showman. I don't mean that in a bad way, right? You need a guy with a good you need a good host voice, a guy with a nice looking studio, someone who's going to organize times and slots and really put the time into that. I'm not going to do all that. I'm not driven enough. So I think my channel will never be a Reason in Theology for that matter, for that reason.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, doing the library studio and all this stuff. I think it's kind of ridiculous.
Well, they all have that, you know. I think honestly,
I made a joke about that, but I'm not going to say it on the show.
I think I read more books than the average person. Just like time wise, I probably seriously read. I'm just going to throw a number like 4 hours a day. That's a lot for like actual just reading, right? You know, I don't have these massive bookshelves these people have. You know, maybe I sleep more.
You probably do.
Maybe they read, you know, 12 hours from 8 o'clock at night and then they don't sleep all night. I have no idea.
And it's from the same secondary source material.
But you know, I've come to the conclusion though that people really aren't reading the stuff. That's what, you know, right? I think people have, let's say, Father Richard Price's Minutes of Chalcedon, but they're not reading the minutes. They have, let's say, Dr. Schumacher's book on the Dormition homilies, but they're not reading the Dormition homilies. You know, so like it's kind of easy to run
primary sources.
Yeah, it's easy to run circles around these people if you actually read the stuff. You know, sadly, more and more I've been reading a little more secondary sources lately, but simply because I'm reading on stuff where the primary sources isn't translated in English yet, so you're kind of stuck.
Yeah,
You
unless
know?
you go into language studies but anyway, all right. Well, first off, I'd like to thank everyone who came on to listen. As I said, we're on Odysee again. I'm gonna put that address in there. Well, let me see. I didn't actually save it here, so just to put that in there on the StreamYard. Hold on one second. And so this is where we're filming from now. So because basically it's blockchain based, it's if YouTube decides that I said COVID too many times and I'm gone, well, we're still here. So give us a follow.
Luckily that link is easy to remember.
Yeah, or it actually will just pull up with Orthodox Apologetics. You don't even need the 5. But
okay.
but yeah, and so that's what I recommend. Anyway, I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank everyone here. I want to thank Craig for being on and being giving his his really insight on this whole sad kind of change in what happened. But new things come of it. This is a reboot of our show. So this is going to be everything changes, and what we have to aim for is changing for the better. With that, hopefully, I'll be back. I'll be back, God willing, next week. As I mentioned previously, I am still doing the NFTU channel. That is on Odysee also, so you can find it. And Craig, if you want to talk about your channel and where to find you, etc.
Oh, sure, yeah. I'm Orthodox Christian Theology. You can put that in the YouTube thing or orthodoxchristiantheology.com. Most of all, just please pray for me. Pray that the Lord would be merciful to me, give me humility, give me wisdom, pray for my family. I'd really appreciate it.
All right, and that I'm sure everyone will, and thank you, and likewise, and have a good night, all.
God bless all.
Okay.